Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to part 11 of the 70 Great Mysteries of the Ancient World, unlocking the secrets of past civilizations. A wonderful book showing us the archaeological evidence or historical data to compare against mysteries, myths, and legends. And this part brings us on to tombs and lost treasures, a particular part of archaeological history that I am very excited to explore with you. Before I get started, I just wanted to reference the fact that I am aware of the state of adverts on this channel. So, as you may or may not know, as a small channel with under 1,000 subscribers, I have no control whatsoever of the adverts or placement of them. And it has come to my attention, I've experienced it myself rather disappointingly, just how many adverts can be shown during my videos. I was checking my crossword video recently, and I think about 3 or 4 adverts came up during the video, and that is not what I want as an ASMR content creator, to have you, my dear viewer, experience, who wants to listen to relaxation content and then be blasted with dental advertisements. It's a shame. I would never normally do this, but if you have seen my content before, if you do enjoy the content today, please could I ask you to consider subscribing. That's the closest thing I can think to do to manage the advert content on this channel. I would want to remove all instances of adverts from videos during that interrupt the content. So if you do like what you see, please do drop me a subscription. That would be wonderful, and I would appreciate it very, very much. But without much further ado, let's get into number 50, the puzzle of Tomb 55, 1335 to 1322 BC, in Amarna and Thebes, Egypt. Gaston Maspero in 1907 here saying, "I believe in the end the identity of the owner of the coffin may prove a surprise." So this is a view down here of across the chamber of KV55 as discovered. So a bit of a wreck. And here are some panels of the shrine leaning against the wall, and behind those is the coffin. And here is a reconstruction of showing how material was strewn throughout the tomb, most of it on top of chippings that had once largely blocked the descending corridor, so it looks like it has all just collapsed and slipped down and filled the tomb. So January 1907, the expedition of American Theodore M. Davis to the Valley of the Kings at Thebes found a tomb. Like most of them, its damaged contents were in chaos, but in this case, the disturbance was not the result of tomb robbery, but actually the outcome of official activity in ancient times. So resolving this mystery of what had occurred has exercised the minds of Egyptologists for nearly a century. So the tomb, with the official number KV, Kings Valley 55, comprises a stairway, a corridor, and a single chamber. Objects are strewn all around, and the largest was a dismantled shrine, originally made to surround the sarcophagus of Queen T, a wife of Amenophes III, by her son Akhenaten, who is often known as the heretic pharaoh because they abolished the traditional religion of Egypt in favour of the worship of a single sun god known as the Aten. For protective charms, these magic bricks were placed around the chamber, and one of them bore the pharaoh's name. In a niche in the north wall of the chamber, there were 4 canopic jars, made to contain the internal organs of a junior wife of Akhenaten, Kia, but their inscriptions are erased. Clay seal impressions found on the floor of the tomb bore the name of Akhenaten's successor, Tutankhamun. Here's an example of the canopic jar. Look how precious that top is. another illustration down here where the lid has been jolted off the top and lies at the far end of the room, and then panels from the shrine lie all along the left hand side of the wall and on the floor. So the key item was a coffin, but made for Kia, but extensively modified for a king, and unfortunately the identity of that king had been hidden by the deliberate erasure of his name wherever it occurred, and the removal of the coffin's gold face mask. The shrine had also suffered similar damage, with images and names of Akhenaten all destroyed. A mummy was badly damaged by the damp and lay within it. An initial examiner was misled by the collapsed pelvis into declaring the corpse to be that of a woman. So Davis thus christened the sepulchre the Tomb of Queen T, or Time, but by the time this book of his title had come out, a proper examination had shown the body to be that of a man. So the almost universal opinion was that it belonged to Akhenaten himself. His memory had been condemned after his death, thus explaining all the erasures of the coffin and the shrine. But others said it could be Smenkhare, who seems to have ruled as Akhenaten's co-regent during his last few years, and suffered from the same disruption as the heretic pharaoh himself. So there's a lot of argument and to-inferring as to who this is. But important additional evidence was supplied by the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. So Tutankhamun's mummy showed that he and KV-55 individual were closely related. They were either siblings or a parent and child. And secondly, the tomb contained numerous items that had originally been built for Smenkhare's burial but never used. For miniature coffins intended for Smenkhare's internal organs, as well as one of his full-size coffins. All had been reinscribed for use by Tutankhamun, but showed traces of their original owner. This is a coffin that had been purposely mutilated, so as well as losing its face. All the cartouches had been cut out. So others have continued to argue that the body is that of Akhenaten, which estimates the age of death of the mummy have been little help, because different anatomists produce figures ranging from around 20, which favours Smenkhare, to 30 or 40, which is more appropriate to Akhenaten. Many scenarios have been produced to explain history of the tomb, most of them mutually exclusive. The only broadly common thread is that the mummy, whoever it was, had originally been buried at Tell el-Amarna, the new capital city built by Akhenaten, some 300 kilometers north of Thebes, and had been moved to KV-55 following the abandonment of the new city. So Amarna ceased to be the capital around the middle of the reign of Tutankhamun, and it was definitively abandoned after his death. So the tomb seems to have been established sometimes between the middle of Tutankhamun's reign and his burial, when his seal would have gone out of use. So one view is that Smenkhare and or Akhenaten, together with the latter's mother, Tiyu, who had been buried with him at Amarna, had all been transferred to KV-55 as soon as the government abandoned the city. And the mutilation of the tomb's contents is attributed to either the violently anti-Atenist kings of the early 19th dynasty or the officials of Ramesses IX. So it's perhaps during the construction of that pharaoh's adjacent tomb that KV-55 may have been rediscovered, and Tai's body would have been removed and reburied elsewhere, but a shrine left behind, and a section of it jammed in the only partly unblocked entrance corridor. One other body might have been removed. The remaining one was deprived of its identity. The images of Akhenaten on the shrine were destroyed before the tomb was closed, and its last remaining occupant abandoned to eternal obscurity. Another option, though, is that after Tutankhamun died, but before his burial, means that monuments were destroyed, which had been occurring during Tutankhamun's lifetime. The presence on the throne of Akhenaten's son must have acted as some restraint on the forces of reaction, but after his death, that tether would have disappeared. The body will have been installed alone and nameless in its new tomb from the outset. That's another scenario. And the ultimate disorder will then have been the result of the rediscovery of it during the reign of the economically troubled Ramesses IX. So gold-hungry officials would have been keen to remove the gilded contents for salvage, frustrated by a section of shrine jamming in the entrance passage. That seems plausible, doesn't it? A bit of cave robbing. Tomb raiding. So this is a reconstruction of the skull here, and here it is wearing the Nim's headdress, used for his interment. However, as we've already noted, it's certain that whilst Mankari had completed at least one coffin, together with his canopics, he wasn't buried using his own equipment, which instead was put into service for the young King Tutankhamun. Menkari was by no means a devoted Adenist, in spite of later adopting the name Nefertari. His funerary equipment was completely traditional. He's the head of the conventional pantheon, Amun, who was worshipped in his temple, but he seems to have died while his father Akhenaten, the author of the Atenist Revolution, yet lived. So given Akhenaten's complete lack of toleration of anything connected with deities other than Aten, visible in his widespread mutilation of the polytheistic monuments, it's likely that Akhenaten denied Menkari burial with the traditionalist equipment that the latter had prepared for himself. So if so, containers of the mummy and viscera would have been required. The appropriately religious correct equipment that they had once belonged to Kia was altered for the young king and was used in his funeral, almost certainly in a tomb in the royal Wadi at Amarna, where he was sheltered by Queen Tai's shrine. Only the lid of the KV-55 coffin is currently in the Cairo Museum. The gold from the rotted remains of the trough seems to have been stolen from the museum during the First World War and has recently turned up in Germany. Unconfirmed reports indicate the presence of one intact cartouche of Menkari, corroborating the indications of a fragment of gold from the coffin in Cairo, and the solution noted just above. It is to be hoped that this side of the question may finally be put to rest when the restored coffin trough is returned to its rightful owner, the Cairo Museum. It's crazy to think, isn't it, during times of war or plunder, that somebody could just straight up take an entire coffin lid or something, or coffin, and just get it back to their home country. Number 51, we have the question of the tomb, the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, 4th century BC, Alexandria, Egypt. Lucan in the 1st century AD says, Caesar paid a hurried visit to the rock-hewn tomb which housed the body of that mad if glorious adventurer Alexander the Great, whom death had cut off in his prime, thus avenging a defeated world. So when Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC, it was no doubt envisioned that his mortal remains were destined for the ancestral royal burial ground of the Macedonian king Zedegai, which is modern Virginia in northern Greece. In Babylon, his body was highly unusually embalmed rather than cremated, then became the focus of a power struggle, as various claimants to Alexander's empire competed for the succession. Burying one's predecessor was the legitimate right of the new monarch. Alexander himself is reported to have expressed the wish to be buried at Siwa, the oracular shrine of Zeus, Ammon, in the western Egyptian desert. Here Alexander had been flattered by being told that he was son of Ra, meaning in this context son of Zeus, Ammon. It was after this that the attribute of his god, the ram horns, was sometimes added to Alexander's image. Whether burial at Siwa really was expressed in his wish, however, was merely a story invented as part of a propaganda war in the aftermath of his death, where we're unlikely to ever know for certain. Here is a marble head of Alexander the Great with characteristic hairstyle and distant gaze, and a posthumous coin portrait of Alexander as Zeus Ammon, with the ram's horns issued by Lysimachus in the early 3rd century BC, 4th century BC. In the event, it was Ptolemy Soter, the ruler of Egypt, who managed to win possession of Alexander's corpse. He went to Damascus in Syria and interfered with Aridaeus, the satrap responsible for conveying the body from Babylon. So probably following the offer of a massive bribe, the funeral cortege was diverted and wended its way, not back to Macedonia, but to Egypt. So it's ironic that we know more about the elaborately decorated hearse, which might have taken around 2 years to build, that bore Alexander's body on this journey, than we do about the details of his final resting place. Diodorus, the Sicilian historian writing in the 1st century BC, but drawing on eyewitness accounts, had left us with a meticulous description. So this is a suggested reconstruction of that funeral hearse. Amazing. So what happened next is uncertain. One historical tradition reports that Alexander's body was first taken to Memphis before being transferred to Alexandria. Seems likely that he was in fact interred at Memphis, at least for a brief time. But it was for the few years that one source, Curtius Rufus, reports is open to question, especially since our main authorities of what happened to Alexander's corpse, Diodorus and Strabo, make no mention of Memphis. At any rate, probably well before the end of Ptolemy Soter's reign, Alexander's body was transferred to Alexandria, where it was kept on permanent display in a gold coffin. This wasn't to be his last resting place, though. A later successor of Ptolemy Soter, Ptolemy Philopator, was responsible for building a mausoleum for the Ptolemaic dynasty known as the Sema or Soma, which contained the body of Alexander and also Ptolemy's immediate predecessors as rulers of Egypt. So this monument might have been erected around Alexander's original resting place in Alexandria, but it's more likely to have been built on a fresh site nearby, which is probably soon forgotten. Even then, he wasn't allowed to rest in peace. Ptolemy X stole the gold coffin, after which one of the alabaster was substituted instead. The last recorded visitor to the tomb was the Roman Emperor Caracalla in AD 215. The monument was probably destroyed in the riots that engulfed Alexandria around AD 273, and it's astonishing that Bishop John Chrysostom, visiting Alexandria a little more than a century after this, reports that even its location had already been forgotten. So here is a plan of Alexandria in Ptolemaic times, showing the probable position of Alexander's tomb in the Soma of the Ptolemaic dynasty. So this is the East Gate, the necropolis, Soma here, and a reconstruction drawing of a circular mausoleum dating to around 200-150 BC. So no trace of the tomb of Alexander has ever been found, and what remains of it is likely to be buried deep below modern Alexandria. We know roughly where it was. Strabo says specifically that it lay in the area known as the Palaces, a vast complex of royal residences, shrines, pleasure parks next to the eastern harbour, around about here. Alexander's tomb therefore lay probably on or close to the sea, in the northeastern corner of the city, but of its appearance and size no clues are provided by the extant written sources, and attempts to locate it on small-scale representations of the city, such as on decorated clay lamps, are unconvincing. A passage of the 1st century AD Latin poet Lucan indicates that the body lay, not surprisingly, in an underground chamber, and he implies that the roof was pyramidal in form, but it was hardly enough to attempt a convincing reconstruction of its appearance. We do not even know if it was a square or rectangle in shape, which had been the norm for monumental mausolea up to this time, or whether it broke with tradition by being circular. The fact that Lucan employs the word tumulus, used in archaeological parlance to describe a circular tomb, cannot be taken as evidence that Alexander's tomb was circular, because poetic license and metrical demands, rather than descriptive accuracy, may explain the choice of the word. The truth is, we're entirely in the dark about the form and decoration of the tomb, and it's unfortunate that the written accounts by those who had seen and been impressed by the monument have simply not come down to us. Here's an example of a circular mausoleum at La Madrasa near Patna in Algeria. The roof is in the form of a stepped pyramid. The vertical face is ornamented with Doric half columns. Wonderful structure, that. And the detail of the false door of the tomb of the Christian woman in Tabasra, Algeria, 100 to 50 BC. So in the absence of hard evidence, we are left to speculate. The most impressive surviving monuments of pre-Roman North Africa outside Egypt are these images here, which all show close links with the Greek Hellenistic world, and a tall false door divided into 4 unequal compartments, a feature found in nearly all of them. This is commonplace in Macedonian tomb architecture. So this is the largest and most impressive example up here, and this one here has been built somewhere between 200 to 150 BC, and this one built probably a century or so later. So this one's dramatic, standing alone in a wild and desolate landscape, a mysteriously isolated mausoleum, as the settlement to which it belonged to is so far unlocated. And at present these are the without forerunners in the Mediterranean world. Both share two known features of Alexander's tomb, an underground burial chamber reached by a passageway that starts outside the monument, and a pyramidal roof. So it's possible that both used Alexander's tomb at Alexandria as their model. Is it coincidence that in Cyrenaica, eastern Libya, the part of the Greek world closest to Egypt, circular mausolea appeared in the late Hellenistic period? Is it coincidental, too, that when Augustus wished to express his dynastic ambitions early in the period of his consolidation of power over the Roman Empire, he chose to erect for himself on the Campus Martius at Rome in 28 BC a massive circular mausoleum? This in turn became a model for the showy tombs of the aristocratic elite throughout the Roman period. These circular form is reflected in monuments such as Hadrian's mausoleum in Rome and Theodoric's mausoleum, tomb at Ravenna. And in the 18th century it was recovered as a suitable means of expression for impressive family mausolea in other parts of Europe, such as Castle Howard in Yorkshire and Brocklesby in Lincolnshire. So it's tempting to speculate that Alexander's tomb in Alexandria was circular, and the first Numidian kings and later Augustus were taking a lead from this illustrious predecessor. I mean, that seems plausible, doesn't it? We can further guess that the tomb was decorated by either freestanding or engaged columns around the exterior, and was no doubt richly embellished with sculpture. But all of this is incapable of strict proof. A recent attempt by the late Achille Adriani to identify Alexander's tomb with a simple tomb made of alabaster slabs in the Eastern Cemetery at Alexandria is unconvincing. But until what remains of the actual tomb is, by chance, unearthed by archaeologists under modern Alexandria, we are unlikely ever to know what the final resting place of this remarkable man really looked like. I suppose we have to also wait. I suppose when doors will be unlocked when technology advances so much that you can run certain scans and 3D processing technology or something that you can just click a button and see what's under the ground for miles. I imagine that technology is somewhere on the radar. Here we have the tomb of China's first emperor, 210 BC in Xi'an, China. Here's Sima Jin saying, as soon as the first emperor became king of Qin, excavations and building was started at Mount Li. The tomb was filled with models of palaces, pavilions and offices, as well as fine vessels, precious stones and rarities. Artisans were ordered to fix up crossbows so that any thief breaking in would be shot. So if you travel east from Xi'an, past intensively farmed fields framed by rolling hills, you'll notice a low mound known as Mount Li. Here it is, Mount Li, covering the subterranean palace and tomb of China's first emperor. Must have been higher at some point, but erosion has taken its toll. So local people for centuries assumed it to be simply a natural part of the landscape, but even 60 years ago, intriguing large terracotta human figures have been turned up in their vicinity. The chance digging of a well in 1974 increased speculation that this was a very special place in the history of China. Peasants encountered a jumbled mass of life-size clay soldiers still bearing their original paint and holding bronze weaponry. The locals had stumbled upon the silent army that for 2 millennia had protected the tomb of Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. In the year 221 BC, a vital phase of China's history known as the Warring States period drew to a close. Since 453 BC, the major states had been embroiled in a virtually continuous conflict for supremacy. It was a time when armies measured in tens and possibly hundreds of thousands locked in combat, when the art of war and weaponry advanced in great leaps. By 311, the state of Qin conquered the rich basin of Sichuan, and in 277 Qin fell, followed by Han and Wei. Here's a map showing China during this period, and the location of Xi'an and Shenyang. And so the victorious King Sheng proclaimed himself Qin Shi Huangdi. The tomb of Master Shi, one of his high officials who died in 217 BC, contains the oldest surviving legal documents in China. 500 precious bamboo slips that record a new legal regime based on the strict Obsessed with the notion of immortality, already in 246 BC he ordered 700,000 conscripts to build a tomb hardly rivaled in the history of mankind. 700,000 conscripts to build it, that is crazy. So set within a vast rectangular walled precinct, the tomb complex is known to us from two sources. The first is archaeology, and the second contemporary historic records. So within the enclosure before the tomb itself are the pits containing the Terracotta Army, very famous of course. There are a few sites in world archaeology that can prepare visitors for the spectacle that confronts them as they descend into the viewing area of Pit 1, now partially revealed by Chinese archaeologists. Serried rows of silent terracotta warriors within long parallel chambers disappear into the distance. A chariot and 4 horses are positioned towards the front. The infantry soldiers stand ready, proudly erect, holding long-handled bronze spears or a quiver of arrows, the edges still sharp to the touch. Closer inspection reveals the intricacy of the body armour and the scarves to keep out the blast of Siberian air for those sent to the northern frontier. Earlier historians had long appreciated the advances in military organisation that propelled the Qin to supremacy on the battlefield, but who could have imagined that an entire division of over 7,000 soldiers within a subterranean pit covering 12,600 square metres would one day emerge from oblivion? Who would have thought it possible to inspect every member of the army from the tall general down to the meanest foot soldier? This army, frozen in time, is but the tip of the iceberg. A second pit contains the cavalry division of over 100 chariots and 100 war horses. A third pit houses the army headquarters staff. So no one can guess at what other treasures may await discovery. Already a superb bronze chariot and its horses have been unearthed, surely representing the Emperor's own vehicle, which would have taken him on many tours of the Empire before his death, aged 50, in 210 BC. There are chambers containing the skeletons of horses, each looking towards the central tomb, and look at this. Here we have each clay warrior in the huge terracotta army, rendered as an individual using various clay moulds and applied details. The figures were then painted, traces of the pigment still survive. I didn't realise that this army is only partially uncovered, that they were still uncovering elements of it. That is crazy, isn't it? And what a sight it must be to see. An archer kneels and prepares a bow here that was probably taken by robbers soon after the death of the first emperor. And recently discovered chariots with horses and all their equipment. Only a fraction of the army so far has been uncovered. Here they are, still in the painstaking process of uncovering the army, in the pits located outside the tomb mound. They've not yet ventured in to explore the tomb itself, so the contents remain a mystery. How stunning. No visitor can for long ignore the lowering summit of Mount Lee itself in the distance, still rising around 47 metres above the plain, and measuring 350 by 340 metres at the base. Its contents remain a mystery, for no archaeologist has ever ventured within. The historian Sima Qian has provided us with tantalizing clues. Underneath, he says, lies a veritable palace of treasures. The rivers of the empire, the mighty Yangtze in yellow, are represented in mercury, which by mechanical means is made to flow into an inland sea. Huge torches of whale oil were once lit to illuminate the interior, if not for eternity, then for a very long time. The tomb was encased in cast bronze, and the emperor's finest furniture and fittings are set in place for his future needs. His successor decreed that all the emperor's wives who had not borne him sons should accompany him in death. Oh dear. Crossbows were set in place to eliminate unwelcome plunderers and tomb robbers, and in a final autocratic decree, all those involved in the interior construction and fitting out of the tomb chambers were executed. That's terrible. So pits containing the skeletons of many men, some bearing the scars of butchery, have been found nearby. Imagine slaving away on such a huge project and getting an execution as a reward. Terrible. Perhaps there's little left to find. Only recently a superb Qin dynasty bronze bell embellished with gold and silver was found in the shadow of the tomb, and the historic accounts of the period recount that only a few years after his death the emperor's tomb was entered and sacked. Rebels under their leader, General Zhang Yu, plundered the riches within the actual imperial palace and entered chambers which contained the Terracotta armies and took their weapons, but some of the clay soldiers and their weapons survived unscathed. If, as the records suggest, 300,000 people in 30 days could not empty the contents of the tomb, then some chambers may survive untouched to this day. Perhaps the quicksilver still flows to the sea within, a mystery that only excavation can solve. But we can be sure of one historic fact. Even if his dynasty barely outlived his own death, and the Emperor's palace tomb had been destroyed, his administrative reforms lived on through the succeeding centuries down to modern times. Sounds like an exciting opportunity. Here we have the hidden treasure of the Dead Sea. Sometime between the mid-1st century BC and mid-1st century AD. The copper scroll treasure, whether real or imaginary, is probably the Jerusalem temple treasure, says Kyle McCarter in 1992. So in the late 1940s, a hidden deposit of scrolls was found by chance in caves at Qumran, in the western shore of the Dead Sea, then in the British Mandate of Palestine. On the withdrawal of the British, the area became part of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The cache of documents that were mostly written on leather, then tightly rolled up and placed in pottery jars, was spread over several caves, and the scrolls themselves were found to contain fragments and large portions of nearly all the books of the Hebrew Bible. Also a considerable amount of literature that probably emanated from the sect that inhabited the site of the Qumran itself. These are known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and of all of them, the copper scroll, named after the metal it's made from, is certainly the strangest. So the cliffs east of Qumran are full of caves in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden, probably around AD 66 at the outbreak of the First Jewish Revolt against Rome. So Père Roland Deveau, one of the chief excavators of Qumran, found the copper scroll in Cave 3 in 2 pieces in 1952. It looks so different that he was not even sure if it belonged with the other scrolls, and neither he nor any of the other archaeologists were able to open it because of its corroded condition. They could discern just enough of the contents to guess that it might contain a description of hidden silver and gold treasure. Classic. But frustratingly, there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. 3.5 years later, it was taken to the then Manchester College of Science and Technology in Northern England, where Professor H. Wright Baker of the engineering department was able to open it with a specially designed miniaturized disc saw. The 12 columns of text preserved in the 23 concave panels or segments that resulted from this delicate operation were found to contain a tantalizing list of treasures and a description of their hiding places throughout ancient Palestine. It's amazing, isn't it? It's like a movie. Here's a section of one of the open panels from the copper scroll. Some letters such as the Aleph in the 6th line down, and Beth in the last are clearly visible, written in the square script that's still used to print in modern Hebrew today. Here's John Allegro examining the 2 pieces of the copper scroll lying in his display case in the Palestine Archaeological Museum, now the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. It was taken soon after the discovery of the skull, and before it was taken to England to be opened and examined. So the scroll itself must have been a very costly item to make. It was clearly intended to be highly durable. It's composed of 3 extremely thin sheets of copper, which is 99% pure. The sheets were originally riveted together to make a scroll 2.4 meters, 8 foot long by 23 centimeters wide, and it's also unique. First, it's long. It's made of copper, not leather, like the other scrolls, and it's written in a Hebrew that's later than the Bible, but earlier than the earliest rabbinic texts. On paleographic grounds, it appears to date in the mid-1st century, or slightly later. Its script is so clumsy that it could not have been set down by a professional scribe, and unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls, it doesn't contain a biblical text, nor sectarian literature that might have emanated from the monastic community at Qumran itself. A few scholars used to think of it as a legendary list, a kind of secret treasure trail of the sort that occurs in folklore all over the world. Today, most experts believe that it records the hiding places of treasure taken from Herod's temple in Jerusalem just before the Romans attacked the city in AD 67. The 23 section of the copper scrolls are in a specially built case at the Jordan Archaeological Museum in Amman, but unfortunately the edges of the sections are deteriorated to light, although many have travelled hopefully the length and breadth of Israel and Jordan in search of it. The first to do so was John Allegro, who was instrumental in bringing it to Manchester and published the first English translation of it. Like all those who followed him, he was unsuccessful. Can it possibly be what it seems, a simple list of treasure about the country? The nature of each cache is given and its location is supplied with a note of the distance in cubits from some neighbouring landmark and even at what depth it has been hidden. Even more mysteriously, a few entries include 2 or 3 Greek letters. No one has any idea what they signify. So in total there are 64 entries, and between them they set out the details of an enormous amount of treasure, mostly in gold and silver bullion, but also in costly ritual vessels and containers of incense. Surely only the temple, which was in effect the state treasury, could possess such wealth or would have used for ceremonial objects and incense. Its dating fits in with the time of the first Jewish revolt. The Romans entered Jerusalem and the capital, and the temple was destroyed by a huge conflagration. So these days the majority opinion believes that, while it does give details of real deposits, the scroll isn't entirely what it seems. The hiding places of the treasure appear to be mostly in the wadis that run down from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea, yet not a single place has ever been found. And in addition, the single piece has, the total amount of the treasure recorded on the scroll, itself so valuable, is so incredible that most scholars think that some sort of code is in operation in the text. It's one that we are never likely to unravel. There's another mystery. Was the treasure originally stolen from the temple by the zealot guerrilla fighters who opposed the Romans so vigorously and ultimately perished at Masada? Or was it removed from the temple for safekeeping by the priests or other parties on the approach of the Roman army? It's one of the many questions still surrounding the Copper Scroll. Here's a big question. The tomb of Christ. The 1st century AD. Jerusalem, Israel. I'm here in a quote from Matthew. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the tomb and departed. So here is a gold ring, a gold fingering appearing to show the original edicule built around the tomb of Christ in the reign of the Emperor Constantine. And the ring itself possibly dates to the 6th century AD and was found in the excavations near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And here is an aerial view of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Their large dome covers the rotunda above the tomb itself. The smaller one on the left is the crossing of the short transept. So many people believe with great confidence that at the heart of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem lies the genuine tomb of Christ. Yet considering that the site of Jesus' burial was lost for over 2 centuries when Jerusalem was a pagan city, how can there be such certainty? In the early 4th century AD, Constantine, the first Roman emperor to become a Christian, declared Christianity the state religion of his empire. And in AD 325, after the Council of Nicaea, he asked Archbishop Macarius of Jerusalem to find the tomb of Christ and to erect a great church over it. The Archbishop seems to have known exactly where to look and without hesitation set about the destruction of the massive Roman temple built by the Emperor Hadrian some 200 years previously. Reaching the temple's foundations, the excavators quickly came upon a tomb that was unanimously declared to be the place where Joseph of Arimathea had hurriedly laid the body of Jesus Christ before the onset of the Sabbath, some 300 years earlier. Was this truly a miracle directed by the hand of God? Or was there perhaps already a tradition that led to Macarius straight to the tomb? Or might there have been another reason? So the Gospels tell us that the Romans crucified Jesus in a place of execution near the walls of Jerusalem, so that the citizens would have a good view of the punishment meted out to criminals. Just beyond the northwest corner of the city there's a quarry for the hard Malachite limestone that is still used to face the buildings of Jerusalem. The quarry has been found to date to the 8th and 7th centuries BC, and by the time of Jesus it was an area of gardens and orchards. In one place in the quarry there was a seam of faulty rock that the masons had left standing because it wasn't suitable for building purposes. This is the rock that many people assume as accept as the Calvary or Golgotha, the place of skulls where Jesus was crucified between the 2 thieves. Nearby, some wealthy citizens of Jerusalem had their tombs carved out of the solid rock of the quarry's walls. Joseph of Arimathea's tomb could well have been one of these, near a place of public execution just beyond the walls of the city, as recounted in the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel story also tells us that the entrance to the tomb was closed with a huge and heavy rock shaped like a millstone, and archaeologists have found a few tombs like it in the area of Jerusalem dating to the time of Jesus. They probably belonged to aristocratic families who buried several generations of their dead in them, sealing them with great round stones rolled in a groove across the entry. They took an enormous amount of strength to move, just like the one in the account of Gospel of Matthew. So before interment, each body had to be bathed and anointed in accordance with the rituals of Jewish law of the time, then shrouded in a winding sheet and placed on a rock-cut bench on one side of the tomb chamber. It was to wash and anoint the body of Christ that the women returned to the tomb in the early hours of the day after the Sabbath, only to find the stone miraculously rolled aside and the burial bench empty. Here's the view from the interior of one of the so-called Tomb of Herod's daughters in western Jerusalem. So beyond the ancient city walls, as were all the tombs of the period, the great stone running in its groove can clearly be seen, and a short flight of steps leading down to the rock-cut tomb. So for years the Christians at Jerusalem venerated the site, but it was lost in the early 2nd century when Hadrian destroyed the city and founded his pagan colony of Aelia Capitolina on its ruins. In around AD 135 he built a great temple complex on a high platform, dedicating it to Aphrodite, goddess of love. Perhaps there was really a persistent tradition that it was over the site of the tomb and the place of the crucifixion that the emperor built his temple. According to St. Jerome, writing around AD 395, there may have even been a large statue of the goddess erected on the rock of Calvary nearby. In the later Christian view, Hadrian built the temple of the site over the Holy Tomb in order to deny Christians access to their holiest places. I mean, it's certainly true that he discouraged Christians and Jews alike from practicing their faiths. However, a tiny Christian presence survived in Jerusalem throughout the Roman period. By the time Constantine ordered the whereabouts of the crucifixion and burial of Christ to be located, the size of the city and even the extent of its walls had changed a great deal. Even the general location of the tomb remained a traditional memory, so how could Christians have still been aware of the exact site of Christians' burial, especially when there had been so few of them in the city in its pagan Roman days? And yet without a glance beyond the city walls, Archbishop Macarius instantly went to the great Roman temple on the north side of the Forum at the heart of Hadrian city. So at the time of the crucifixion, this area had indeed been outside the city, and had only been incorporated into it about 10 to 15 years after Christ's death. So we have one possible eyewitness account of the finding of the tombs around AD 337, quite late in its life. Eusebius, the bishop of Caesarea and church historian, wrote a biography of the Emperor Constantine. According to him, the excavators were amazed to find the tomb of Christ so easily. But did they really find the right tomb among the many that stood in the area? Or did they just find a tomb and assume it was the right one? Perhaps it was marked in some way, with the name of Jesus scratched on it, although this isn't mentioned by Eusebius or any later sources. Martin Biddle of Hertford College, Oxford, has pointed out that this is how the tomb of St. Peter was identified deep beneath the high altar of the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome. In any case, the church that arose in Jerusalem, the church of the Martyrion, or Witness, was the greatest of its age, the ancestor of today's church of the Holy Sepulchre, and beyond the great church, across from the Holy Garden, lay the tomb itself, cut free from its surrounding rock and standing proud, the ground levelled all around it. And sometime after dedicating the church in AD 335, Constantine enclosed the rock tomb in a small shrine called the Edicule, a little house, and created a great rotunda around it, roofing it within a huge dome. So here is a section east to west through the current Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and at the lowest eastern end is the Chapel of the True Cross, supposedly where Helena, Constantine's mother, located the cross on which Jesus was crucified. Steps lead up to it from the ambulatory. The small dome is above the transept crossing, the area of the original Holy Garden with the Rock of Calvary in its southeastern corner. And the edicule here is as it appears today. It's shored up by British scaffolding of the Mandate period in the first half of the 20th century. So beyond it can be seen some of the arches of the rotunda that encircle the edicule. So today, the third descendant of the original Edicule enshrines the tomb, but even if we accept, as most people do, that it is indeed the tomb of Christ, one final mystery still attaches to it, for we have no idea if anything of the original tomb survives. So over the many centuries since the original Edicule and the church that houses it were built, it has several times been totally or partly destroyed by fire, earthquake, and human hand. The last time the Edicule was rebuilt was after a disastrous fire in 1808. Most recently, the structure became unstable during the British Mandate after an earthquake in 1927, and it was shored up by steel scaffolding. This is still in place, and it's been clear that substantial building work on it must be undertaken in the near future. And when this happens, with the mission of the Christian religious communities who are responsible for the church, it should be possible to detect whether anything remains of the actual tomb in which Christ's body was originally laid to rest. That brings us rather neatly to the end of this part of the 70 Great Mysteries of the Ancient World. So thank you so much for joining me. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you enjoy the content and want to see more, please do consider subscribing. It will greatly help me in controlling the ad content on this channel to allow for maximum relaxation, focus, learning and concentration. I'll see you next time.